So the idea for the book came about because when I was in graduate school, I wanted to write this paper about the rights of children and what was happening to them in the conflict, the war in Colombia. But I could not find any material to write my research paper on. I found this old tattery book about the Shining Path movement, the Sendero Luminoso, in Peru. And this was a book that probably hadn't been taken out of Butler Library since the 80s, probably. And that was it. So I went back to Colombia and I started the research from scratch. I found the woman that I portray in my book, who I've called Leonor. I found her at the age of 17 in a group home in Bogota, a group home that took in children who had once belonged to the armed group, the FARC. And at that time, the FARC, and still, were the biggest menace to society as a terrorist group. So I found Leonor in a group home. She was 17 years old, and 2 weeks before we met, she had been part of the FARC. And she was there in the group home trying to figure out what to do, how to rebuild her life, how to put the puzzles of her life back together. But she wasn't entirely gone from the FARC yet, or at least in her mind, because she still considered herself part of that group. Now, we were talking about language and we were talking about words matter. And so between her and I, at the beginning, when we first met, there was a lot of distrust because I'm a white, blue-eyed woman from Bogota who speaks Spanish a certain way and has a certain tone and cadence to how I speak. And right away, the way she'd been indoctrinated was that I'm the enemy. She referred to the United States as imperialist Yankees. In their language, they do not say they kidnap people. They say they retain them for attacks. So yes, words matter. So her intonation, Leonor's intonation and cadence brought about this Southern Colombia to her and this distrust of her and I in the beginning, which of course, like it all comes out in just a single conversation, a single exchange of, hola, ¿cómo estás? Hey, how you doing? The words that we use signal where we come from, where we've been.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. We're recording this in December, and it's like super close to Christmas. So I'm like super excited because I know there's gifts upstairs, and I'm not allowed to look. So I'm going to podcast instead. Paula is here with me today. We're going to be talking about her journey as an author, and I'm excited because there's a connection between Paula and I that we didn't even realize we had until we got on and did our pre-chat and went, holy smokes, this is really cool that we have this in connection with each other. We didn't even know. We're actually neighbors. So this is really fun. Paula, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. So glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, Merry Christmas.
This is amazing. It's like Christmas Eve. Isn't it Christmas Eve? Yeah, it's Christmas Eve.
Yes.
This is crazy. So we get to have, you're my Christmas present this year. So this is great.
Oh, you're mine.
See? Come on.
You.
This is amazing. So we're going to unwrap your book and your journey as an author. See what I did there? Unwrap this, and we're going to have a great conversation today about your book. We'll get to our connection as far as geographically how we're connected, but where are you right now in this big world of ours?
So right now I'm in Florida because it turned out how life does flips and flops for everybody and no one can plan anything, that I have this great, amazing daughter who plays tennis, and she's in the middle of a tennis tournament right now here in Florida. So I took a little time off to unwrap my present too on this iPod. Nice. And yes, Florida. It's not sunny. It's cold. It's windy. Really? Okay. Very bizarre, but here we are. Christmas Day. It's amazing. In Florida, Christmas Eve.
Nice. I love it. But we have a connection geographically to where you grew up, which is exciting. I live in Niagara, near Niagara Falls, and you grew up here for a period of your life. And we just found this out as we did our chat earlier. Can you tell everybody, like, how did you end up in Canada? Because you came from another country. Can you kind of give us a little bit of the background of how all this happened?
Wait, before I do that, though, I have to say that you probably look out your window.
Yes.
Rowing course in Port
Right.
Dalhousie.
Port Dalhousie. It's really close.
I spent every single afternoon all through high school on that rowing course.
That's amazing. I walk my dogs down there.
Yes.
Right now. It's like so close to my house. It's so cool. And that's where you grew up. You spent a lot of time on the water then.
That boathouse every single afternoon from 3:45 to 6:30, 7. Schoolboy regatta.
Okay, so I have a thing I'm going to do for you. I'm going to take a copy of your book down there and take some pictures of your book at that place.
On the stands.
Right there on the stands. And prop up your book and send you some pictures back. How's that?
That's amazing.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can do that for you because it's like literally a few minutes from my house. So it's so cool. So I'm going to do that for you. I'm making note of that. But anyways, so you came to Canada, but where did you come from originally?
We came to Canada. We came from Bogota. And I was 9 years old. It was 1983, February of 1983. And it was a decision that my parents came to in 3 days. What had happened was that in the 1980s in Colombia, there was an armed group called the M19. And before there was talk of the current groups, the FARC, the ELN, there was talk of the M19. The M19 were a group of young university students who decided that they had to take the communist struggle and the socialist struggle to the cities where the financial and political decision makers were, and that they had to hurt the families of those people in order to implement change. These M19s were, or so they told me after, once I had a chance to interview them 30 years later after the fact, that they were caught up in a socialist revolution. They were caught up in the time of Che Guevara from Cuba, of Trotsky, of hippies, of peace and love. And they wanted to transform the country into a more socialist state. So they decided that they had to bring the struggle to the cities. Now, so my family lived in Bogota, Colombia, the capital. And my father came home from work. He went into his room, and I thought it was very strange as a 9-year-old that he wasn't doing his usual routines. He wasn't slipping onto his pajamas or hanging out with us. He got on a call and he spoke English into the phone, which was a language I did not understand then because I had grown up completely in Spanish. And within 3 hours, he and my mother had decided that we would be moving to Toronto. Toronto was a natural choice for them because my older brother was in boarding school at the time in Toronto. He was not far from you, not far from Port Dalhousie, at a school in St. Catharines. And so we moved to Toronto, and my life started completely different. Within a couple of weeks, I was transformed from this sheltered child in Bogota, Colombia, to a girl who would ride her bike around the neighborhood in Toronto with freedom. And I remember my mother looking out the window and kind of spying like mothers do. And she was very happy to see that I was able to have this freedom to ride the bike around the neighborhood by myself and go basically wherever I wanted. Because in Colombia, since the time that I was born, we've always had to have bodyguards. And the reason we've had to have bodyguards is because my grandfather founded a construction company. This was long before I was born. And his name carries, I guess, a little bit of fame. There's a stadium and a main thoroughfare, and his construction company is still going on 3 generations later. And so
Wow.
this brings about the attention of people that perhaps want to cause some disruption. And that was how we were targeted to begin with. So, Dave, I came from never having stepped outside without a bodyguard or stepped out the gates of our houses or the country club or whatnot, to this absolute freedom of riding my bike wherever I wanted, having my own form of transportation, 9, 10 years old. It became a joy to go run errands for my mother. Like if she wanted a letter mailed, oh, I'll do it to the little blue box. Yes, I'll do it. And it was an opening, a release in a way. So although the circumstances of that day of having to make a decision within 3 hours, it still opened up a lot of opportunities in a whole other world for me. So what had happened that day was that a daughter of one of our family's competitors was kidnapped. She was taken right out of her classroom in a university. Like kidnappers barged in, took her, and then there you go, she was kidnapped. And her crime, according to the M19, was that she was her father's daughter. And so as I guess she was 17, 18-year-old, a university student, had to pay for that, had to pay for whatever it was that the father had or the pressure that they wanted to exert onto the government to make policy decisions that would change things.
Okay, so you come to Canada, you're 9 years of age, you leave your homeland where you've grown up, you have a new language to learn, you're in another climate completely. Canada in February is not welcoming to anyone. It's cold in February, but you come to Canada and you find freedom, but you had to miss some part of your childhood by coming to Canada. Like, what did you feel like you gave up as you kind of look back at 9 years of age? What did you give up having to come to Canada in such a quick, short amount of time?
Like right off the bat, what I most missed was my nanny. This was a woman that I had grown up with next to me since I was born.
Wow.
She knew everything about me, knew my habits. She was like my mother. So I missed her a lot. Also had to give up the country, I suppose, in the sense of family, in the sense of the food or our homes, our spaces. But then again, being 8, 9 years old, it's children adapt very quickly.
Yeah.
I was very excited in Canada to have new opportunities of new life, all of that. And yes, I did not speak English very well. And I was held back from school, not held back from school because I went right into the next grade that I was supposed to. But I would read a lot. I would read a lot of Beverly Cleary and Judy Blume. And I just devoured that and watched a lot of Three's Company.
Three's Company. You said that when we chatted. Yes,
Judy
I love
Blume,
that.
Beverly Cleary, and Three's Company that
What
my
a combo.
English vocabulary started to come through.
Come and knock on our door. Right? Yeah, there it is. We've been waiting for you. Yeah, there you go. I love that. That's so good. I don't know if that's the best learning mode to learn English and everything is Three's Company, but I love I just love the picture of you watching that at home after school and stuff. That speaks a lot to your family too. So you come to Canada with your family. Did all of your family stay with you in Canada, or did some of them go back to Colombia?
Came. My older brother was already in boarding school.
Yeah.
And my father would come back and forth.
Okay.
And they did this for 5 years, from the time I was in fourth grade to the time I was in ninth grade. And then in ninth grade, I went to boarding school.
Okay.
And my mother returned back to Bogota. And I guess they did what parents have to do to get their children through what they need to do.
So you stayed in Canada all the way through high school then?
I stayed in Canada all the way through high school.
Okay.
And then I went to college in the States. I went to Brown University. Right from boarding school, I went to Brown University. And then I moved right to New York.
Wow.
I worked for a little bit in news, and I worked a little bit as a fact checker at magazines. And I wrote freelance for Jane Magazine, for 17, for Mary Claire.
Nice.
I worked at this TV network called Court TV.
Okay, I know Court TV, yeah.
Yes, at Court TV. I was in a group with 3-4 others, all of us really young. And we thought we were like the kid labor of Court TV. And we were in charge of finding the cases to cover for Court TV.
Wow.
That was really good training for reporting.
So your writing then has gone back further than just writing today. You've been writing for many, many years then. Yes,
and I was a literature major at Brown University. I was comparative literature. And the way life also is that my junior year abroad in Paris, there were a lot of strikes. The students were striking at the universities. And classes didn't start. And here we came as Brown students, ready to go, ready to hit the ground running. And classes didn't start. And when they did, they didn't happen, or the students wouldn't come into the classroom. And all of this was very strange to us. So I spent a lot of time reading during my junior year in Paris. I was very lucky to have had the time to read like Émile Zola, Colette, all of the Maupassant, the French classics, Molière, and with a very leisurely type of way to really absorb and enjoy the text and the way that it was constructed and the narrative. Because there was nothing else going on my junior year as far as classes. It was I was part of the Brown in Paris, and I was registered at La Sorbonne.
nice.
Yes. So that was really kind of a way I found a love for writing and an appreciation for the word on the page and the way that a text, a short story, a novel, a piece of theater is constructed.
I love how you're pulling inspiration from so many different things, not just one aspect of writing. Like if you look back over your whole career as a writer and contributor, there's so many different things that you've had your hands in, which I'm sure shapes you as a person. For the authors that are listening to our conversation, how important is it from your perspective to pull from different things that kind of shape you as a writer, instead of just, if you're a novelist, you only study novels. You're studying more than that. How does your surroundings, how does that shape you as an author when you pull in from all these different types of writing experiences?
So what I always find is that if you're stuck in writing, it may be that you pick up a text that helps you get over that part where you're stuck. Because in whatever piece of writing it may be, a short story or maybe even a piece of poetry, you find a narrator or a transition or a voice that helps you get over that hump. So when people say, oh, I have writer's block, it's not so much that you have writer's block, I don't think. It's more that you need to find inspiration and you need to go into other people's work and be submerged in what they've done. And then you get all, at least I do, I get all excited again and I want to go back to the page and I try something else.
It expands your view and gives you new insight, which then can create a new avenue you didn't even think of. Right?
I guess there's all those literary theories that say that the writer's an accumulation of everything they've ever read.
Good. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Say that again, because that was really good. Say it again.
There's a lot of literary theorists that say that the writer is an accumulation of all the literature that they've ever read. It's somehow distilled and comes inside of them, and then it goes out on the page.
I love that. And that kind of also counterbalances the whole imposter syndrome of who would ever want to read what I have to say or what I have to write. You know, there's so many amazing people out there, and you're naming off these amazing writers, and you're thinking, well, who am I? Like, who's going to read my book? But again, you're the distillation of all those other authors, and your experience combined. No one else can write your book then.
So another thing, I guess, in this is that because of my background, because of Colombia, and because of being very sheltered, and because of not having a normal teenage life of freedom, whenever we returned back to Colombia during the holidays, because we still have our family there, our roots there. I would find friends in books. So in other words, I occupied my time reading, and it was like the characters and the authors would become my friends. And funny, going back to my nanny, she would always say, but what's wrong with you? It's going to turn you into more of an introvert than you already are. But I found more enjoyment in reading. And I would go to the bookstore in Bogota, and then I would start to read all of the Latin American authors, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Isabel Allende. Those are like the two big ones that come to mind. That were really Laura Restrepo, Laura Esquivel, a lot of the Latin American writers of that magical realism era of that time in the 80s and 90s. So I really just pulled a lot of literature from all over the place, because as an undergraduate, then I went back and did comparative literature. And I did it between French and Spanish literature. So I was reading in French, and I was reading in Spanish, and I was writing my papers in English.
Okay, so when we just pause here for a second. I have listeners that listen to the show in Paris. I have listeners that listen in Latin America. And I think we'd be amiss if we didn't do this, but could you just let's take a pause for a second. Can you just welcome our listeners in France, and also welcome our listeners in like Colombia and Latin America, because they're listening to the show. They're listening to me and other English-speaking authors. But the moment we can flick the switch and speak to them in their language is like this joyous moment for our listeners to hear something that sounds like home from our guest. And I can't do it. You can.
Okay.
So can you do something to welcome people?
My accent at this.
No, but I hear you speak, French, and I'm like, I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay. Je suis très heureuse d'être ici avec toi aujourd'hui.
Excellent. Now for our listeners in Latin America.
Italian.
Oh, come on. Just keep going then. I'll just take a drink.
Sono
Keep going.
contenta di stare qui oggi.
And next, what do you have for us next?
Estoy muy contenta de estar aquí con ustedes hoy.
See? Like, we could just do this all day, right?
Okay, but my French and my Italian are very, very rusty, and I apologize.
But I'm sure there you have people overjoyed to hear that on an English-speaking podcast. So that's a gift that you have that I don't have.
Heureuse pour Colette, Émile Zola, Maupassant, parce qu'ils sont extraordinaires.
Now, see, that sounds like music to me. English feels very... When I hear you speak, it sounds like a song to me.
I get a kick out of the Italians.
Mm-hmm.
Ma sono stanca di stare qui con oggi o
Right?
adesso.
Yeah.
Fa
And that could be,
qualcosa.
and it could be the most loving, kind thing, but sometimes it sounds like they're quite angry, but it's just beautiful. There's so
But
much
in a
passion.
melodic way.
It's
Yes.
passion. There's passion in it. I don't know. As an English speaker growing up my whole life, I just feel like we're lacking a little bit of that romance in our vocabulary. I don't know.
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit more like dry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like it needs some seasoning.
But this is interesting. So I have a Russian friend, and she came, a writer, a very good
Yeah.
writer, my friend Olga. And she told me that in Russian, there are no words for certain things that we have in English that are affection terms.
Really?
Like there are no words to describe certain feelings that we have in English or in other languages. So when she is with her children who are American, it's hard for her to speak to them in Russian and talk about those feelings. As nowadays we're encouraged to teach children to name all their feelings. She says, well, then I have to switch over to English because there are no words for that in Russian.
Wow. It's amazing. It's amazing how powerful a word can be.
Yes.
Right. Right.
Yes.
And that also translates to being an author, that your words matter. Like, see how we did that? We kind of tied that all together.
Yes.
So let's jump over to your book. Your book is coming out, and I'm excited to share this with everybody because it seems like you came to Canada, you found freedom here, but then you had the chance to go back to your homeland and speak to some of the people who at one point would have been, I guess, the enemy, who would have threatened your family, and you had a chance to speak to them, which is kind of the genesis of the book. That's an interesting story. Let's talk about how the idea for the book came to be and maybe how long it took you to write this book.
So the idea for the book came about because when I was in graduate school at Columbia University in international affairs, I wanted to write this paper about the rights of children and what was happening to them in the conflict, the war in Colombia. But I could not find any material to write my research paper on. I found this old tattery book about the Shining Path movement, the Sendero Luminoso in Peru. And this was a book that probably hadn't been taken out of Butler Library since the 80s, probably. And that was it. So I went back to Colombia and I started the research from scratch. I found the woman that I portray in my book, who I've called Leonor. I found her at the age of 17 in a group home in Bogota, a group home that took in children who had once belonged to the armed group, the FARC. And at that time, the FARC, and still, were the biggest menace to society as a terrorist group. But honestly, they're just a big drug trafficking group. Their ideology and any traces of something that they might have been wanting are gone. They've been dismantled to know that, like, everybody knows now, it's just a big drug trafficking group. So I found Leonor in a group home. She was 17 years old. And 2 weeks before we met, she had been part of the FARC. And she was there in the group home trying to figure out what to do, how to rebuild her life, how to put the puzzles of her life back together. But she wasn't entirely gone from the FARC yet, or at least in her mind, because she still considered herself part of that group. Now, we were talking about language and we were talking about words matter. And so between her and I, at the beginning, when we first met, there was a lot of distrust because I'm a white, blue-eyed woman from Bogota who speaks Spanish a certain way and has a certain tone and cadence to how I speak. And right away, the way she'd been indoctrinated was that I'm the enemy. She referred to the United States as imperialist Yankees. In their language, they do not say they kidnap people. They say they retain them for attacks. Some of those groups also say, for the listeners in Venezuela, I saw recently that Alex Saab, who was imprisoned in the US for drug trafficking, was exchanged and returned to Venezuela. And in the news, the Venezuelan news, it said not that he had been in a prison because of drug trafficking, but that he had been kidnapped by the United States during a trip to the United States.
Mm.
So yes, words matter. So her intonation, Leonor's intonation and cadence brought about this Southern Colombia to her and this distrust of her and I in the beginning, which of course, like it all comes out in just a single conversation, a single exchange of, hola, ¿cómo estás? Hey, how you doing? The words that we use signal where we come from, where we've been.
It's amazing. So tell me more about the book. Like, what is the big idea when you sat down to write? Were you trying to capture her entire life, or are you trying to capture a piece of her life? What is kind of the underlying idea of the book? So for a reader that picks this book up, what are you hoping they walk away with as a reader?
So this is a book that took me 20 years to write. I began this book, as I said, in graduate school when I was 27 years old. And this year I turned 50.
Wow.
So it's been a struggle because, first of all, with Leonor, it's not that she knew her truth. It's not that she could say this happened at this date, this time, this, that, because she was clouded by post-traumatic stress disorder. Of course, she's been in a lifetime in the guerrilla. She also did not want to tell me exactly what was going on. And it took many years of building the source and trust from each other for her to actually tell me, well, no, I did know about the drugs. I did know about how they hid arms. Of course, I knew all this. But when you first started asking me these questions, I would walk away from the question because this had been something I'd been trained not to tell you. And I didn't know exactly who you were. She said, we had this conversation also about words matter. And I explained to her, I'm a journalist. But to her, a journalist is a spy.
Right.
So she also, in a more open way, said to me 17, 18 years after we met, you asked me a lot of questions and I would say, but it's not because I didn't want to tell you. I just didn't really know the answer at that moment. So it took a lot of time for Leonor to sit down with psychiatrists that were given to her by the government's rehabilitation program, and to make peace with her mother and understand her story and its complexity. And now also, in order to write it and to present it to publishers to understand, I didn't make any of this up. This is really true.
Yeah.
This really great agent that I have, Anna Gosh, she said, but what is your methodology? So for 10 days, somewhere in there, I remember it was the 4th of July and it was so incredibly hot outside. I spent maybe 12 hours a day going through footnotes for each fact that Leonor said to corroborate from sources, whether it was newspaper reports, think tank reports, or there was this great report by Human Rights Watch that was written by Sebastian Brett that documented everything that she was telling me. about the human rights abuses that she suffered, that
Yeah.
she was a victim of.
So the words matter, but the facts matter as well for you as you write this
The
book.
words,
That's really important.
facts.
Yeah.
Then it was for writers out there, this was a complete odyssey to find a publisher that would take a chance on this, because I was told many times, we don't want your story. We just want Leonor's story. But what was important to me is that I also tell my story, because was a more macro way to see Colombia.
Yeah.
And her story and my story matter because that's at the heart of the conflict. And if Leonor and I, and also other members of the M19, a woman, Vera Grave, that I sat down with, can sit down and say and talk to each other and understand where we're all coming from, then maybe we disarm whatever political agenda we have and we see each other as women, as humans, and understand each other a little bit more.
Yeah. Was it, for you as an author writing this, was it surreal to sit down with people who forced you to leave Colombia and come to Canada, force you to break up your family where you're not all together, take you away from your from people that you love and care for, and you end up in Canada? Was it weird to sit down with these people who were kind of instrumental in that big change in your life? Like I would be angry. I would have emotions when I sit down and speak with these people that were a threat to my family in the past. And now I'm talking to them. Was that like kind of part of the moment for you as you did this?
I think I was so invested, intrigued in understanding where they were coming from, that whatever emotions I had, I sort of was able to have a poker face about.
Okay. Yeah.
But there was one former M19 who was part of he was a very senior social worker within the rehabilitation program. And I found out that my questions to him, he would mock me later with his colleagues because I didn't understand the intricacies of their guerrilla world. And so he thought me shallow and uninformed and all of that. Of course, I'm shallow and uninformed. I didn't grow up within a terrorist group. I grew up in Canada, in the snow, where there's openness and creativity and democracy. And I had friends from all over the world. So, but when I met, I have to give credit that when I met with this other former M19, Vera Grave, so the M19 signed a peace accord in the 1990s, and Vera Grave had formed part of the leadership of the M19, and she was the only woman, or one of the only women within the M19. And truthfully, I was just very curious to find out from her what her experience had been to be a woman in a male-dominated group as a commander. Because Leonor was a woman, a girl, a little girl in a male-dominated group, but as a child, no rank.
Yeah.
So Vera was able to explain to me from her side how difficult it had been to stick to her ideals and what she believed in, and how she had been abused as a woman, even within the commanders themselves, which totally disarms their whole equality and socialism and all of that. Vera was very committed to the M19, and she considered it her family. They call each other the compas, like compañeros. And so within the compas, she said they were my family. So she had a lover who was the main M19 commander, Jaime Bateman. And she maintained a relationship with him that was convenient for him, but then he would leave on the weekends to go see his family and his children. So at one point, and I'm not revealing anything Veda doesn't want to reveal because she wrote about it in her memoir as well. That was how I was able to corroborate her story. She became pregnant by Jaime Bateman's child. And he asked her to abort, to have an abortion. So within the group, no, she was told she could not be a mother. She could not have those feelings of being a woman, even though this was something she really wanted, to be a mother, to experience that. Because according to the literature of the time of Fidel Castro, of Che Guevara, no, the women commanders have to be ready also to be the leaders. And any space that's emotional, that's your home, that doesn't follow the scriptures of what they were doing.
Okay. Well, okay, so at any point during the writing of this, was your safety at risk at all when you're sitting down and doing the research and talking to these people? Again, going back to you as a child, you were removed for safety reasons. So now you're talking to people who were part of that whole decision. I'm just curious if you had any instances where you were maybe a little nervous about who you were talking to or what you were uncovering for the sake of your family and your life.
I was in that age group where in 27, 28, 29, 30, where you don't measure risk as much. And I just wanted to get the story.
Yeah.
But yes, definitely. When I was in the group homes, the FARC group homes, it wasn't just that perhaps I could be abducted at any moment, but also that I could be physically hurt, because these are children, minors, teens, who are not only have hormones and the raging attitude of teenagers and rebellion and adolescence, but they've also been conditioned for war, for killing, for threatening.
Yeah.
So yes. There was one moment that I recall that I was looking over my notes and I didn't have a peripheral of what was around me. And this boy who was a victim of landmines, he had his crutch up in the air and he was about to hit me with it. And this other boy that I had friended said, "Stop, don't do that." And at that moment, Leonor witnessed that. And she thought, well, if so-and-so is sticking up for Paula, the spy, the reporter, the journalist, the enemy, protecting her, then she must be okay in some way. Okay, fine, I'll talk to her.
Wow.
But I got so wrapped up in really wanting to understand and where she was coming from and to dig and dig and dig that I thought my safety was secondary.
Wow. Okay. Okay, so like I could talk to you about this book all day because I was so excited to hear about this. And again, I'm going to take a copy down to Ridley and we're going to take some pictures. I'll take some pictures at Ridley too. Hey, why not? But I'm just amazed at the commitment to writing this book, where I see these courses online and it's like, write a book in 30 days and blah, blah, blah.
No.
And this is like a totally different journey because of the level of detail and investigation, and your court TV days are coming back to us, and all of these things that made you before you wrote this. It's like you were drawing on all these different assets and abilities and education and connections to make this book happen. You must be proud of this at the end of the day, that you have this out in the world. You're able to talk about it. You're able to share this with the world. What is a proud moment for you as an author, knowing that this book is going to be sitting in someone's hands or on someone's shelf proudly out there in the world? What does that mean to you as an author?
I think I'm just really grateful. First of all, that Leonor trusted me with her story.
Yeah.
There would be no book without that young woman trusting me and building the kinship that we did in order to have a dialogue. And that for the grace of God that we kept in touch for all those years. There were many, many years where she didn't have a cell phone. She didn't have a contact. She went through several group homes. She went through bouts of alcoholism, of drug addiction, all of those things. And that we were still able to stay in contact with each other, and that I was able to have notes and go through them. So most proud, I suppose, is this universe speaking, saying, well, you were able to still maintain contact with Leonor, and that's the biggest thing. Because without maintaining contact with her, there would be no book. But yes, it was very difficult. I'm not going to lie. Because of my background, I had a lot of meltdowns as the book started because it touched a lot inside of me. And I knew I really wanted to do the book, but I didn't understand why I wanted to do the book. So in my late 20s, I went to a lot of psychiatrists and I would just sit in their office and cry and cry and cry. And it was just a space to cry. So the book allowed me to understand why I was crying. And it's because my whole life, I've always heard on the news, like killings and murders and the results of drug trafficking and all of these things. And not to go further, but I was in a yoga class once, and the teacher lifted me and was able to open up one of my chakras, and all these tears just fell from me. And at that moment, I didn't know why I was crying in yoga class. Why is a woman crying in yoga class?
Wow.
But then I realized this book and why it had to be my story and Leonor's story. The reason I was crying in yoga class was not just because I was hearing all these horrific things about abuse from Leonor. She was a young girl when a commander, 34 years her senior, took her as a sex slave. And she had to live this day in, day out, day in, day out. But also I was crying in yoga class because when I was at Ridley, when I was in boarding school and I was a 10th grader, my brother was kidnapped in Colombia. And he was held as a hostage in a small room for 6 months. And so in my mind, I associated Leonor with my brother's captors. Because when I was a teenager myself, I overheard my brother saying that it had been teenagers who were his captors and held him in the room and held him hostage. So there was a lot of emotion that Leonor could have easily been my brother's captors.
Right.
And when my brother came back, he was very changed and he was very emotional. And I think even though we don't talk about it, it's still to this day very tender. There was probably a realization that his captors were teens and humans and have backgrounds, and the society themselves itself has turned them into that.
Wow. Okay, Paula, this is like
sorry. So that's why
my brain
yoga
is
class, okay?
No, I know. Like I could just see everyone else in yoga class going, "Is this a new move that we have to learn?" Like, I don't know this one. I know downward dog. I know all the other ones. I don't know crying one. What is this?
Yeah,
so
right?
Your whole class is confused at that point. Like, that's amazing. Okay, so I'm going to end off here in a moment, Paula, because again, I could talk to you all day. But as far as connecting with you around the book, I know you have your website. If you can give us that information, and maybe where you're most active on social media as well, because I can anticipate that there's going to be people wanting to reach out to you, have a conversation with you, get more information about you and your journey. So where do we find you? And after that, I have one more question to kind of wrap up our conversation. Where do we go? How do we connect with you after this chat today?
Oh, I'd love for you guys to reach out. So my website is pauladelgadokling.com. And on there you can write me. I'm happy to talk to writers. I'm happy to talk to people who are interested in Colombia or children's rights, women's rights, gender rights, or just anyone who enjoyed the book and has a question. I'm also active on Instagram. It's Paula Delgado-Kling. And Facebook, Paula Delgado-Kling _author on Facebook. Probably the best if you want to keep in touch to see what readings I may have and all of that. Yes, the Instagram and the Facebook. And if anyone is reading the book and they're part of a book club or they're reading it as a group, I'm happy to join you on Zoom any day to talk about it.
That's a great offer. I love that.
Yes, of course.
We'll have all the links in the show notes for people to go to your website and all your social handles. That's amazing. So my final question, Paula, because
yes,
again, I could talk to you all day, but I know you have things to do. You talk about your journey at 9 years of age coming to Canada from Colombia. You're a mother now, and you have a young daughter. Like, her life is noticeably different than what you grew up as and the things that you've had to face. Her life is considerably different, which is amazing. But how important is it for you as an author and a mother to share legacy with your daughter so that she understands your story? Because I think as children growing up, we don't really associate parents having a story. They're just adults in our lives who tell us what to do. And we don't really understand that they were like young. They had a story before they had us as children. How important is it for you as a mother to explain and have your daughter understand who you are and what you've lived through legacy as an author? How important is it to share legacy? What do you think?
So my daughter and I are very, very, very close. I guess maybe because of the way I grew up, I've never had babysitters or nannies or all of that. I can honestly say that I've been the one to pick her up from school and put her to bed every night. And when I was writing this book and I was going through the many, many, many drafts, she was a child and sometimes she'd play under the desk, or I would sneak out that time to write when she was at the park. So where we live in New York, we live near Bleecker Park. And Bleecker Park is the children's park for our area, for the West Village. And there was a bench that became my office next to the slides. And we would go there a lot after school, and even before that when she was younger. And everybody at the park sort of understood by my body language that I was doing something else, and they would leave me alone. And at a very young age, my daughter understood that, yes, I was there, I'm present, and I'm on the bench, but she knew to leave me alone to do that, to get going with it. So she's always grown up that way. And as for the writers out there, I must have read Goodnight Moon 1,000 times. And then I said, oh, Philippa, come on, we have to do something else, not Goodnight Moon, like at some point. So I began to read to her stories from the Paris Review or the New Yorker. And funny enough, like her attention stayed. She's, no, don't stop, keep going. So legacy as a writer, she now loves reading. She now is a very good writer herself. She can communicate emotion on the page. Now, legacy as from Colombia, we often return to visit family in Colombia. And she knows that were from there and that her family's there. And the complexities of Colombia are harder for any adult to understand. So I'm not sure she's there yet.
Yeah.
But she gets it.
It's amazing. So I promised you that I'll take pictures of your book at Ridley, at the rowing area, but I want you to commit to me that you're going to take a picture of your book on that bench someday. And put that book on the bench and take a picture of it and send that to me, because I'd love to see that picture someday.
I will. I hope the bench is still there.
At least the park. I want to make sure that book comes back.
The best.
Right. So I want a picture there someday of that book in that space, knowing that that's where it was created.
Bleecker Park is the neighborhood's answer to like our backyard.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love it. So I need that picture someday.
Okay.
Someday. Okay. You have homework to do.
Yes.
I just love the idea of you coming back to the spot where you wrote the book, and part of the book was written there.
It was written
you can
everywhere.
celebrate. You can celebrate that moment though again, right? And go, it's done. I have it in my hands. I can sit down on a bench, if not the bench, and celebrate the fact that it's done. Like, that is a good moment.
Yes, definitely.
So make sure you share that on Instagram too, because I'd love to share that.
Oh, that'd be great. Yes, that's a good idea. Yes, it was written in a lot of places.
Awesome. Paula, thank you so much for doing this. And I'm so happy that Kat brought us together.
Yeah.
She's amazing. If you're looking for somebody to help you with your PR, she's great, by the way. Links in the show notes. But it's so cool that we were able to have a chat, realize that we have a geographic connection to the two of us, and then to have a great conversation around your book. Congratulations on
thank you.
20 years of effort to get here. I hope you rejoice and celebrate this often. So all the best in the new year as well with your family. And I hope that 2024 serves up a great year for you. All right, as you unwrap 2024. I hope you have a great 2024. Thank you so much for doing this, Paula.
Thank you, Dave, for having me. Thank you.
Amazing. All the information in the show notes, everyone. Please go check it out. Again, Paula, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, thanks for checking out the latest episode of Living the Next Chapter. I'm so happy to bring on these amazing authors and to share their stories, but I do have to confess I have a problem. And people who know me best would say, Dave, you have more than one problem. My problem is I have more episodes than I can release to you through my audio host, but I have a solution for you. Oh yes, head over to our YouTube channel, subscribe today to our YouTube channel, and you can get the most recent episode. I'm posting this episode today that I recorded today, and you can get it now on YouTube. Jump the line, move right past that big burly guy at the door. You can get right in and get the most recent episode of Living the Next Chapter on our YouTube channel. Make sure you go there. livingthenextchapter.com has all the information. And again, I want to thank you for making this podcast such a great joy to create. Catch you on the next one.